105B towards the bottom, but 8 lines.
Not there, David Schwartz.
Colon in the middle of the line.
Not there, Lloyd.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, hear you fine. I hear you fine.
Okay. All right. 105B at the bottom, 8 lines from the bottom. So we're in the middle of discussing bribery. Right page myself here. Okay. Rabbanan, Isilei Hahu Gavra Kanta de Gadilne de Vegile. There was Rabbanan had a case brought to him. He was the judge, and this guy, one of the litigants, brought him a basket of fish. Amalei. So Rabbanan says, "My vitzich, what are you doing? Why are you bringing me this fish?" Amalei, Dina Yisli says, "I'm a litigant in your court." So he says, "Lo kavu." So Rabbanan says, "I can't accept that. Can't accept gifts from litigants in my court." Amalei, Pasulnach Ladina. And he said, I'm disqualifying. I'm recusing myself. I can't judge your case. You have to go to a different court, a different judge. Amalei. So he says, Dida Demar Lobina. Okay, so I won't be judged by you. Kabul Kabumar, but you can still take the fish, even though you're no longer involved in the case. Delo Limnan Mar Meakruve Bikurim. Don't prevent me from bringing Bikurim. He's being figurative here. Bikurim is one of the gifts brought to the temple and received by the Kohanim. And he's calling this a gift of Bikurim. The Gemara will discuss why in a second, but he's saying, just take it. It's a gift. It's nothing to do with my court case. You're not in the case anymore. It's fine. Detanya, why is he calling them Bikurim? The Ishba Mibal Shalisha Vayave Elisha Elohim Lechem Bikurim Esrim Lechem Seorim V'Karmel B'Tsiklono. So the Navi states that this man brought Elisha, the prophet, a gift of 20 loaves of bread and barley and fresh stuff, and it calls it Bikurim. Now, Elisha was not a Kohen. Elisha wouldn't be allowed to eat actual Bikurim. It's considered as if it were Bikurim. If you bring a gift to a Talmid Chacham, to a sage, that's like bringing Bikurim to the Kohen. So it's not literally Bikurim, but it's still so. So the guy was saying to Rabbanan, it's a privilege to give you a gift, basically. Amalei, so he said, Kabule lo be'inan de kabel. I didn't want to take the gift of Hashad Amalei Tama, but now that you're telling me it has nothing to do with being judged by me because I recused myself, but Kabulino, so now I can take the gift. Shadra the Kamid of Nachman. And he sent the man's case to a different judge of Nachman. Sholach and he sent a message. Nidainimar lahai gavra anan pesulna le'ledina. He said to Rav Nachman, "You take this case because I have to recuse myself from the case." But he didn't say why. The Amar Rav Nachman says, "Midashalach li hachi," since he sent me this message that he's recused himself. Shmamina de Krevehu must be their relatives, right? This guy must be a relative of Rabbanan. That must be why he recused himself. Obviously, he didn't know about the attempted bribery. Havakaim dina diasmi kame. And Rav Nachman was in the midst of adjudicating a case involving orphans. Amar, but he said, Hayase v'Hayase. Look, I have 2 cases in front of me, but each one is, it has a reason for it to take precedence, right? One is judging for orphans, and one is judging a relative of the great Rabbanan. So I said, so I'm going to give precedence to the case involving the relative of Rabbanan. Of course, he wasn't really a relative, right? Salika Ladina Diasme. So he put aside the case involving the orphans, but Achte Ladine, and he took this other case. Kevin the Chazabaldina Yakar de Kabid. So now the other litigant involved in that case sees that, they're treating my opponent with such respect, right? It's clearly a total case of broken telephone, right? The guy had nothing to do with Rabbanan. The reason that he that he recused himself as this attempted bribery, or if Nachman misunderstood. So now, so the guy's opponent, Isan Tanase, now his opponent became tongue-tied. He's afraid that the court is going to favor his opponent because they see that they're giving him this honor, that his case is going to be moved to the front, to the top of the docket, and so he becomes tongue-tied and he loses his case. So it just basically, the point is it's showing how, even though bribery had nothing to do with the actual case, Rav Nachman hadn't been bribed, right? But the ramifications, or the sequence of events set in motion by this attempted bribery ended up winning the guy his case anyway. So that's how, it's just an extreme example of how important it is to avoid any kind of bribery in judgment. Ravanan have a ragil Eliyahu. By the way, Ravanan, he used to have visitations from the prophet Elijah, from Eliyahu. So there's a book, like a midrashic book, that is called Seder Eliyahu, which it's disputed, if the source of it is Eliyahu the prophet, the biblical prophet, or a different Eliyahu, but this source seems to understand that the source was these visitations by Elijah the prophet to Ravanan. Kevan de Avad Hache, once this bribery case took place, and Ravanan, took the money, he took the gift, even though he wasn't in the case anymore. Yisalik, Eliyahu stopped visiting him. So Ravanan, he fasted and he prayed for mercy. Vasa, and Eliyahu came back and taught him again. Kiasa havamavisle, but Ravanan was so afraid when he came back. He made a box. And he kind of sat in the box before Eliyahu because he was embarrassed, afraid, whatever, from Eliyahu. He was afraid Eliyahu was still angry at him. Until he sat in the box taking the whole lesson. And that's why people say Seder Eliyahu Rabba, Seder Eliyahu Zuta. There's a large Eliyahu document and a small Eliyahu document. The large one was what the bulk of what he learned, which was before this incident, and the small one was what he learned afterwards in the box. Okay. So we're just going to revisit for a minute the a tangent of the gift brought to Elisha, the prophet that we referred to before, where we use the word bikurim to mean the gift to the prophet. In the time of Rabbi Yosef, there was anger, meaning God was angry. There was a drought or a famine. Amrin le Rabban Rabbi Yosef. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Yosef, "You should pray for us." Amalahu hashta umar Elisha lechi havu Rabbanim miftar kame havu paishe trei alpha namasan Rabbanan. Elisha, he had so many students that when the students left, right, when everybody went home for vacation, there were still 2,200 students remained behind, right? So imagine how many there were to begin with. So he was such a great teacher. He never prayed to God for mercy when there was a famine. So who am I to beg God for mercy and to represent the people in the case of this famine? Where do we get this idea that there were 2,200 students left in the that stayed in the dorms during the break? And we might how do you know there was that number? Because it's written, what we quoted before. What was written by. So yeah, in the case in this, so that the follow-on to that story of this guy bringing 20 or 22 loaves of bread to Elisha as a gift. So Elisha told his whatever, the guy in charge of the dormitory. He says, like, give it out to my students to eat. So his servant said, what? How can I put this gift before 100 people? It's not enough, right? Now, what does he mean before 100 people? If you're talking about 20 portions, 20 loaves of bread for 100 people. So Bishnei Batsaras Tuvahabu, like if it's a famine, so everybody doesn't get their own challah. Every 5 people have to share a challah. They should be very happy, right? Because there's nothing to eat besides that. So, if only they could get a loaf per 5 people. So that can't be what it means. What it means is, how can I put this before 100 people? It means, how can I share each loaf of bread between 100 people? Well, that certainly can't be done, right? A little challah is not going to serve 100 people. So if that's what it means, then there were 2,200, right? If there were 22 portions brought as a gift, and each portion would have had to feed 100 people, that's 2,200 people. You have a mystery Rabbanan Mibei Rav, and then we're going to go on another tangent of other teachers who had great numbers of students. When the rabbis left the yeshiva of Rav, Havupaishe Alpha Masan Rabin, there 1,200 students would stay behind. Mibei Rav Huna, when they left the academy of Rav Huna, Havupaishe Tamanya Mei Rabbanan, 800 students would stay behind. Rav Huna Havadarish B'Tlei Saramorai. And Rav Huna, he had so many students that he had to have 13, they're not interpreters, but people who would serve as his loudspeaker, right? In other words, he would say something, and they would have like announcers that would broadcast this to the multitudes of students, right? So he had so many students, there had to be 13 of these announcers positioned so that everybody would be able to hear. And when he finished his lecture and everybody got up, and they like brushed off their clothing, they were sitting on the floor, right? So they were dusty. They would all stand up and brush their clothes off. So a big cloud of dust would rise, and would darken the day. And this happened in Bavel, right? It would be so much dust that the people in the west, meaning in the land of Israel, they would see this cloud. They would say, oh, look at that big cloud over to the east. Must be Rav Huna finished his lecture now, and that's why there's this big cloud of dust. Okay. And when the students left the academy of Rav Yosef, 400 would be left behind. And they would call themselves orphans, right? They missed their fellow students. They felt orphaned by the departing people who were going on. When the rabbis left the yeshiva of Abaye, some say this is about Rav Papa, some say it's about Rav Ashi. There were 200 would left behind. They call themselves orphans of the orphans, because there weren't even that many of them to console each other, right? If you have 800 orphans, so they call 800 people left, they call themselves orphans. If there are only 200, they're like, we're even a smaller group, we're more bereft of our companions.
As time has gone on, the size of the yeshiva have diminished here.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I don't really get what it means by they would stay behind. Were they like the people that were, they didn't have anywhere to go during winter break, or they were supported by the yeshiva, or I'm not exactly clear what's going on here, why they stayed behind. But we're meant to understand that if these are the ones that stayed behind, imagine how many were there in the first place. Okay. Rav Yitzchak bar Radifa said in the name of Ami, now we're switching back to who got paid by which fund. We saw that the judges were paid with remember there were two main funds in the temple. One was the Bedek HaBayis, the building fund, and the other was the Lishka, what was it called? Trumas Alishka, the operating fund, I guess I would call that. So we saw that the judges were paid from the Trumas Alishka, from the operating fund. So Rav Yitzchak says, Mevakri Mumin Sheb Yerushalayim, also people who would be checking the sacrifices to see if they were blemished or not. They would take their pay from the operating fund. Amar Yudam Shmuel, Talmidei Chachamim Hamalamdin Hilchos Shchita L'Kohanim, those who taught the Kohanim how to do Shchita properly. So that's a necessary a need for the temple operations. They would take their money from the operating fund. Rav Gidel said, those sages who taught the Kohanim how to take the correct way to take handfuls of ketoras, of the incense, out of the pile and throw it on the fire. Same thing, they would get paid by the operating fund. Those who were like the scribes who checked the accuracy of the of scriptures, of scrolls of Torah. They were on that was also a necessary thing for the temple. They wanted to make sure they had properly books without errors. They would get paid from the operating fund. Amar of Nachman and Rav Nachman said, Nashim ha'argos b'parochos, the women who weave the curtains for the temple, they would get paid from the operating fund. But I, Rav Nachman, say, really, because they should have been paid from not the operating fund. Because they're like, so in the first temple there may have been walls. In the second temple they were curtains. It wasn't as opulent and wasn't as great a structure. So these served as walls, so they should be paid from the building fund. So they asked from Nachman, Nashim hargos b'parachos ubeis garmu almase lechem apanim ubeis aftinas almase aktaris. All these things, the women who who weave the curtains, and also the house of Garmu that made that knew the craft of making the special form of bread, the lechem apanim, the bread that was put on the table in the Azara. Ubeis Aftinas almas Ektaris, and the Aftinas family who knew how to mix the Ketaras. They all took from the operating fund. So this source says that the women who did the curtains were paid from the operating fund, not like Rav Nachman, who wants to say they were paid from the building fund. So Hasam b'davave. That Bryce is talking about the curtains not within the temple, but at the entrances, outside the entrances of the temple. There were 13 curtains in the second temple. Shiva connected Shiva Sharim, 7 before the 7 entrances to the courtyard. 1 at the entrance to the sanctuary. 1 at the entrance to the ulam, the main hall, like the one before the larger hall before you got into the kodesh, where the altar and the table and the menorah were, and Shnayim Badvir, and 2 more curtains in front of the kodesh hakadashim, where the ark was kept. Shnayim, and that makes 11. And Shnayim shekneglan b'aliyah, and 2 on the second floor in the same place, dividing the space above the kodesh hakadashim from the rest of the second floor. So this basically is to support the idea that these were not the curtains. They weren't really part of the building. They weren't the walls of the temple, but they were they were privacy screens. Okay, they were privacy screens, so they were not, according to, so that's why Rav Nachman says they weren't really part of the building. They were operating fund requirements, or that where the Brisa said they were operating fund requirements, but Rav Nachman still felt that they were part of the building.
They lived centuries after the temple was destroyed, and the Mishnah in Medot has some different lists of where the gates were, which would have been written much earlier. And I don't remember it mentioning screens or curtains for the gates.
Well, the idea that there was a curtain before in front of the Kodesh HaKodashim, I think.
Right, but I'm talking the gates of the Azara and so forth.
Yeah. You would know better than me. I have to confess that I don't remember if I ever studied Midas.
I think we'll get to it in about 4 years in Daf Yomi.
Let's put that question on ice then. Tana Rabbanan, Rabbi's taught. Nashim hamagadlos b'neim lapara, the women who would raise their children to be part of the Paraduma ceremony. So this was a really strange. The rabbis instituted some very stringent requirements for how tahor, how pure certain people involved with the Paraduma ceremony had to be. And the reason that they did this was that there was a dispute with the Tzedukim about exactly, the Kohen involved in, I think, in like mixing the ashes in the water. The rabbis felt, based on the oral tradition, that he could be a Tul Yom, right? He didn't wait until he was completely tahor, and the Tzedukim felt he had to be completely tahor. So the rabbis, insisted on using a Tul Yom for this part of the ceremony. However, because they did not want people to think that they were being lax about the purity of the Paraduma, they instituted very stringent rules about other parts of the ritual, and one of them was that they would get a child to carry the water from wherever it came from, the spring, I guess, that it came from, to the temple, and those children had to be they had never become tamei. Now, how do you get a child who's never become tamei? This is crazy, right? They would raise these children on platforms of bedrock or above bedrock, where they could be sure that there was nobody buried, and they would be confined to those places their whole lives until it came the time for them to be to carry this water. Okay, so this sounds pretty horrific, and I find it hard to believe that this ever actually occurred, but I'll leave that to the historians. Anyway, so I guess they had to have a lot of women. I guess you have to be paid for this, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't think you could pay a woman enough to raise a child on a little, keep him on a rock for his whole, childhood. So anyway, they got paid, and they would get paid from the operating fund, because that had to do with the operations aspect of the temple, the preparation of the Paraduma. Abba Shalom says, no, they got paid. They got looked after by the wealthy. Okay, in other words, it didn't come out of the temple fund. They were supported by private individuals. Okay, Ba'amine Rav Huna Meirav. Rav Huna asked Rav, Sharis, the temple vessels, right? The bowls, the forks, whatever, all the vessels that they use. Should they be paid for with the building fund? Are they like ancillary to the altar? The altar is clearly part of the building, right? So are the bowls and forks and spits and whatever that used on the altar considered ancillary to the altar, and therefore they would be paid for by the building fund? Or are they ancillary to the sacrifices? The sacrifices were the operating aspects of the temple. And then therefore and then they would be paid for by the operating fund. Relay, the answer is the operating fund. So he asked, I have a counter source. So they took, this is from Divrei Yamim. From Divrei Yamim. They took the leftover money to the king, and he used it to make the vessels for the altar, for the temple. So So clearly, this was the this was referring to the building fund, right? So why do you, clearly it looks like the vessels were paid for by the leftovers from the building fund. So why do you say it's from the operating fund? Amalei, he answered, whoever taught you ksuvim, which divrei yamim, lo akarich nevi'ah. You're not familiar enough. You didn't get taught properly nevi'ah, prophets. Here's a verse from from Ach lo yaseh beis Hashem sipros ki la'osehom lacha yitnu. They wouldn't make. They wouldn't use the. They wouldn't use the money that was brought to the temple for the vessels. They would give it to the workers, right? The workers who would do the maintenance work. So so here it seems like the building fund, the maintenance work money was not used for the vessel, right? So Mar says, well, what are you criticizing the guy that he knows ksuvim doesn't know nevi'im? You have two opposite sources is the real problem, right? Lokasha, so there's kan shagavu vosiru. In the first verse we quoted is that they collected money for the building fund and they had some left over, right? They used all the money that they needed they finished building and they had money left over. So then it was okay to use that for the vessel for operating costs. All right. In the second case, they didn't have anything left over, right? They only had enough money to finish the building, so they couldn't use that money to for the vessels, right? So Mar says, well, wait a minute, what? You just because you had extra money in the building fund doesn't mean you can use it for operating stuff, right? People donated money to the building fund; they wanted to go to the building. You can't use it for operating costs. Rabbi Avo says yes, you can. Why? Leiv based in Masnalayim, because people understand that this is what's going to happen to the building fund. If there's too much money in the building fund, when they donate to the building fund, they understand that it could go, if the building is finished and there's money left over, it could go to operating costs. Like if it doesn't get used for the building is finished, then it could be used for the kalim, for the vessels. So Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel taught similarly. Klei sharish by mitruma salishka. The money for the vessels comes from the operating fund. Shenamar, and the proof is es sha'ar hakesef. So when we said before, the rest of the money, so it has the definite article, the money. We're going to make an inference from that. Ezu kesef sheish l'shirayim. What money is the money that has leftovers? Haveomer is a trumas alishka. That would be the operating fund. So Mar says, well, what do you mean? The money could mean the leftover money, not the money from which there might be leftovers. So why do we say there might be leftovers from the operating fund? Because every year they had to start a new fund, right? And there were leftovers from the financial year, the fiscal year would have, there was such a concept as having leftovers, and then they would have to do something for the new fiscal year. And so Rava answers, ha'ola ola rishona. We're going to use a case of a different use of the definite article. When the Torah says that you start the service, the sacrificial service of the day with the ola, right? Now there are many olas brought. So which is the ola? Ola rishona, the one that's mentioned first in the Torah, which is the tamid, right? The daily offering is an ola. So that's the one that you start with because it uses the definite article. Hachanami, so when it says ha kesef, the money, kesef rishon, means the first money withdrawn from the fund and not the remainders. Okay, that's a little forced, but all right. Okay, so anyway, we saw that Rav says that the vessels are paid for by the operating fund. So they asked a question. Hakatoras v'chol korbanos hatzibur b'ayin mitrumas halishka. The incense and all the sacrifices come from the operating fund. Mizbeach hazahav u'levana u'klei sharis, and the golden mizbeach, golden altar, and the levana, which is the spice that's used in preparation of the sacrifices, and klei sharis, the vessels, b'ayin mimos and nesachim. They come from the leftover money of the nesachim, of the probably means the nesach is usually the liquid offerings on the mizbeach. Here it may be the flour for the mincha. So if they have leftover money from that fund, which is clearly operating costs, then they use that for the vessels. Mizbach ha'olah halashachos v'azaros, the money for the altar, the outer altar for the olah, and the money for the upkeep of the building, the courtyards and the offices. That comes from the building fund. Chutz l'chomas hazara, things that are outside of the courtyard. That comes from the leftover of the building fund. And that's supported by this Mishnah. The walls of the whole city and all of the maintenance of the city by Mishari Halishka. That's from the leftover of the Trumas Halishka of the operating fund. So anyway, the point that we're trying to make out here is that this stated that the vessels from the operating fund. So Gemara says Tanaihi. Okay, so that's a different opinion. There is actually a difference of opinion. Rav has one, and this price has the other. Disnan, we have a Mishnah. Mosar Truma, leftover of the Truma Salishka of the operating fund. What would they do with it? They would make like a gold overlay for the covering of the inner sanctum of the temple. Mosar Peros. The leftover of the peros, of the like whatever they bought for the operating aspect of the temple, is used for the Ketz HaMizbeach. It's like what they would use to keep the altar running. Like if they have extra stuff, they would if the mizbeach was not being used, was sitting idle, so it doesn't look right. They should always have something being sacrificed to God on the altar. So they would have these extra sacrifices that if they finished the daily service and there was nobody around bringing voluntary offerings, they would say, okay, the temple, the altar is idle. Here's some sacrifices that we could bring. Those were paid for by the leftover of the operating fund. Most are truma. And what about the leftover from the rest of the operating fund? With klei sharis, that was used for the vessels. Okay, so here's an explicit Mishnaic source that the vessels were paid for by the operating fund. Rabbi Kiva says most are truma l'ketz hamizbeach. Yes, the leftover from the operating fund goes to the Ketz HaMizbeach. Not what the Rabbi Shmuel had said was that Mosar Peros, which was a particular aspect of the operating fund. Apparently, they would basically buy, large quantities, like they would buy flour in large quantities for the whole year, let's say, and then, based on the cost of the fluctuating costs during the year, they may have had too much or too little. So if they had too much, that's what they would use for the Ketz HaMizbeach. Rabbi Kiva says no, you go directly to the operating fund for the Ketz HaMizbeach. Now, most of Nesachim l'chei sharis. The excess of Nesachim that we talked about before is for the service, for the vessels. Rabbi Chanina says most of Nesachim l'ketz hamizbeach. the leftover nesachim goes for the extra sacrifices for the altar. Most are truma l'chlei sharis. The extra of the truma salishka of the operating fund would go for the vessels. So I wouldn't want to be the accountant, basically, in the temple, because there's too many. The general accepted accounting procedures are not clear. But neither Rabbi Akiva nor Rabbi Hanina, they did not agree about that, about this idea of buying futures, of buying contracts for the whole year based on the price at the beginning of the year. They didn't buy that. They said that that you would just go with the fluctuating price and not try to predict the market in advance. Peros mahi. What is peros? Which I've explained already. But here, the Gemara will spell it out. The Tanya, we have a brisa. Most are truma. The extra operating funds. What would they do with it? Locally peros bazal. They would buy, flour or whatever they needed, whatever produce they needed at low prices, at a low point in the market. And they would sell them at high prices. So they'd basically be speculating in the market. And so that's the profit that they made. That would be what they use for, according to that Rabbi Shmuel, for the Ketam Mizbeach, for the extra sacrifices for the altar. And that's the source. Most are peros the Ketam Mizbeach. That's what the Mishnah is referring to earlier, that we quoted earlier. The extra profit from this speculation goes to the extra sacrifices. Now, what did it mean before when it said neither Rabbi Akiva nor Rabbi Hanina agreed about this idea of peros, of speculation? Because we have another Mishnah, most are sharing lishka, the remaining, the leftover, the extra money from the operating fund. What would they do? They would buy wine and oil and flour that they would need in the temple, and then they would resell them, and the profits would go to the treasury. Rabbi Shmuel, that's what Rabbi Shmuel says. Rabbi Akiva says no. They don't use temple funds to speculate. Likewise, charity funds you can't use for speculation. You can't invest in risky ventures with the charity funds, because you're risking the money that belongs to the poor, or that's intended for the poor.
Some board members of some Jewish institutions didn't learn this Gemara.
Why don't you speculate with temple funds? And then use because you don't want to. It's like, I would put it a little bit differently. It's like it's not dignified for this communal money and this temple money to be used in these grubby speculation deals. The Gemara states it a little bit differently. It's like, this is a poor person's venture to try to stretch your funds, but actually in our contemporary world, it's actually, I guess, a rich person's venture. People who have, I guess ideally people who have surplus funds can invest them in these ventures, but actually it often, of course, trips up poor people too. Why can't you use charitable funds for this kind of speculation? Because maybe you've got your money tied up in this venture, and somebody comes to the fund and says, I need support, and the money is tied up and it can't be distributed to the people who need it when they need it. But like a there won't be anything left to give them. Okay, I think we will stop here, and David will pick up here tomorrow.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.